Welcome to the field, July 22nd. We're here standing in front of the plot by the office. Unfortunately, you'll notice that compared to last week, we had a little bit of hail, a few hail events over the weekend. So unfortunately, which was a lot of storms moved through the area the last 3 or 4 days. Going to spend a lot of part of this week evaluating yield loss or potential yield loss, defoliation for a lot of guys. So some of the things that we think about after a hail or windstorm, obviously, is trying to estimate what percent of defoliation occurred. So when we look at or typically step into a field, some of the things that we look at, we'll use this plant for an example. Is basically just looking at it to evaluate how much leaf area is lost. Some of the things that we can do, obviously, the top of this plant is a lot worse off, than the bottom third, bottom half of the plant. But really, when we start to look at those stripped up leaves, if there's any green, and granted, this was only 2-3 days after the hailstorm, but when we have any green left on these leaves, we'll count that as still being able to photosynthesize and create energy for that plant. So we won't count this as any leaf loss right here, any green material on the plant. We'll continue to count that as a viable leaf or viable leaf area. So obviously assessing from top to bottom, estimating that percent leaf loss. Some of the other things that we can do when we're walking through the field is just look at the ground, obviously, look to see how much green leaf material is on the ground. One thing that I like to do is look at how much sunlight is actually hitting the ground compared to last week or the last time we were in this field. Last week, we couldn't see hardly any sunlight at all hit the bottom or hit the soil surface. And now you can see we've got, there's probably a third, 25-30% of that soil sunlight's hitting. So that's really a good indicator of, overall maybe yield potential hit or reduction, because that sunlight's what we need to obviously intercept to make grain in the end. So this field or this hybrid we're looking at right here was brown silk. We'd count this as brown silk. So obviously not an ideal time at all. Not that there's any time for ideal hail damage or leaf loss, but tassel, R1, R2 is probably the worst time that we can see hail damage or leaf loss. So if we estimate the leaf loss on this plant at about 30%, most hail charts will have a 15-17% yield loss based on that 30% leaf loss, and that's kind of what I'd estimate this plant to be, is around 30% leaf loss. We get to 50% leaf loss, and then we're talking 30+% yield reduction. So obviously a lot of things can happen between now and the end of the season that will influence that potential yield loss. But obviously not good. One thing I'll point out on this plant, we've had a low population of spider mites in this field. They've been on the bottom 1 or 2 leaves kind of all season and hanging out. We really weren't worried about them. We're obviously monitoring. Now we're a little bit more concerned, a little bit more proactive on controlling those mites. We weren't relying on that bottom part of the canopy very much until the top part got hailed. So now we're doing, we think there's a high enough yield potential left in this field to go ahead and treat those mites and try to keep those bottom leaves healthy. The other thing I'll mention is we always have a lot of questions about fungicide application after a hail event. Our stance and a lot of research shows that if you don't have fungal disease, gray leaf spot is one of those that we often think of around here. If you don't have gray leaf spot or other fungal disease activity in your field, it's unlikely to see a big benefit from fungicide application right after a hail event. So obviously consider each field by field to evaluate disease and go from there as far as making a fungicide application. So with that week, we'll wrap it up. We'll see you next week.